Welcome to this issue of TALK, our member newsletter online and in the narrative tradition. Very pleased to have Bea Chestnut as my guest this month. Bea, I'd like to hear a little bit about your process of the book that you've written, The Complete Enneagram. It's been so well received in the community, and not just in the narrative tradition, but you're really getting the word out to a lot of people. How did it come about that it turned into such a fulfilled project?
Well, it took a long time, of course. It took many years, and I think there were two things that helped it come about. One was, I love the Enneagram. I've always had a big passion for it. And as a psychotherapist, I use it in my work all the time. And so I guess I just felt like I had some things to say about the types, about the system, just from my experience of using it in my own personal process and also using it with my clients. And then the second thing was learning the subtypes from Claudio Naranjo in 2004. To me, he added so much more information than we had before, and it really revolutionized my own work on myself to learn the subtypes and the way he was teaching them in 2004. And so I just made it sort of a mission to get as much information as I could about it, and so I could bring it to other people, because I just felt like it had helped me so much that I thought other people would appreciate hearing all the new information that he was bringing.
One of the things that I was struck with the book is I felt like you really found your voice in being able to talk about the Enneagram, and I think that would be really helpful for a lot of our members in terms of what makes that transition from the learning of it and the practice of it to finding in your own words, how to speak about it so that it's really you owning the message and putting it out based on all that integration.
Right. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is many years of therapy. It's just using it in my own personal therapy, learning to feel more confident in myself, learning that if I had something that I wanted to say, maybe there was some value in that, and that I could find a good way to say that in a way that would help people. And I think, too, it was just my experience as a therapist, just seeing certain things over and over again and noticing that not all the books had been written by therapists. David Daniels and Jerry Wagner have written books, but that maybe that might be a good point of view. And I think it was also my evolution as a therapist in working with people over the years and seeing the patterns from that point of view as well that made me want to describe things like the coping strategies and the focus of attention and how things fit together, as well as how each type breaks down into 3 different versions, and also to offer some information, some systematized information about the work that each type can do, because I often heard about books that would introduce the types, that there wasn't enough about what do you do once you know your type. So I wanted to put that in there as well. There is one more thing I do want to add about that question, because I think that the question of how do you find your voice is a really good one, and I think I did have to find my voice. You're exactly right to write the book. And I wanted the book to be really accessible to people who are new to the Enneagram, as well as I wanted to be really valuable for people who already know the Enneagram. And so 2 things. I think one is just really doing enough of my own work to be more confident that I had my own voice. I think as a 2, it's really easy to sort of focus on other people so much that when it comes to what is your sense of self about, what is your voice, that's a very difficult thing, and it's something that it's hard to feel confident about. So I think through therapy and through becoming a therapist and all these things, it really helped me kind of ground in myself more, and so I think that's part of what helped me feel like I did have a voice and that I could sustain that voice through a book. And then I think the other thing is, just over the years loving the Enneagram as I do, and people know that I love the Enneagram, I found myself in a lot of times at like cocktail parties and at cafes with friends and friends of friends, and the topic would come up, and just trying to find ways to talk about the Enneagram in a very clear, concise way that was sort of brought people in very quickly. And so having had that practice and then wanting to apply that in a book, again, as a way of being able to invite people into the system and into what the types are all about, because it's so amazing.
For those of you who have not read the book, you start with this very simple explanation around the acorn. Can you just kind of summarize that process as kind of a starting place for people?
Sure. The book has 12 chapters total. It has 3 introductory chapters and 9 type chapters, 1 chapter on each type. In the 3 introductory chapters, again, I wanted that to be something that helped bring people in. The first chapter is just about the Enneagram and self-awareness, like what's the importance of self-knowledge and self-awareness, and how do you use the Enneagram to increase that. The second introductory chapter is just an introduction to what is personality and what is the system, what are the types, what are the subtypes, what are the centers. And then the third introductory chapter is where the acorn story is, what you're talking about. And that was that became something that I really ended up loving about that piece of the book, because that chapter was, how do we understand the Enneagram as coming from ancient wisdom, and what does it have to tell us about sort of the process of human development generally, both in a psychological way and a spiritual way? And I found this story, it actually comes from Maurice Nicoll, who is a student of Gurdjieff, and Jacob Needleman, who's a philosopher who writes about the Gurdjieff work, had referenced it, but Cynthia Bourgeault had a version of this acorn story in her book, The Wisdom Way of Knowing. It's a great little book. And when I read that, I thought this is the perfect thing to bring into my book, to talk about the piece about how the Enneagram really helps you see the shadow. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts of the Enneagram, is it talks about patterns that you probably already see in yourself to some degree, but it also really points the way to blind spots and the shadow. And so the acorn story is about how there's this kingdom of acorns that lives at a foot of an oak tree. And one day, and they're, getting along, living their lives as acorns, kind of polishing their shells, having their personalities and not really thinking much about it. But then one day, this sort of naughty little stranger, this acorn drops out of the sky and basically brings the message, we are that, and he points to the oak tree. So it's this idea that we have this higher nature, we have this divine part of ourselves that we need to manifest, and they say, well, how do we do that? How would we become that oak tree? And he says it has something to do with going into the ground and letting your shell crack open. So it's the idea that you really have to have a process where you really examine yourself, you really let your sort of personality break open, and that might involve conscious suffering, it might involve facing your fears, because the personality is a defensive self-system. And if we're really going to loosen the grip of our personality fixations, we really need to allow ourselves to see it enough so that we can kind of let it go. And often that involves facing fear of putting down defenses and letting go of long-held patterns that have helped us feel safe in the world. So I love that story because it really summed up what I thought was a very important piece about what the Enneagram brings to people, which is helping them see the work that they need to do that they may not see, and especially the painful and scary work of really facing who they are, such that they can manifest their full potential, which is symbolized by the oak tree.
I'm also reminded, like with the narrative tradition, how maybe it is that we're all gathering initially in personality, but it is being able to share our stories, just like the acorn did.
Yes.
In a way.
Right, that's part of cracking open your shell, is being able to be honest in front of people and share who you are and share your stories and share your pains. And I think that's what's so moving often about the narrative process, is that people really learn the types, but they also learn how much more we are and what the process is of becoming the more that we are through telling our stories and sharing ourselves in an open way with other people.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, and appreciate all that you're sharing out in the world. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.